Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of 30 Coins. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really liked that this episode kind of answered a lot of my questions about last episode about like how we're going to handle the whole like everyone coming out of Elena's clinic, and it's like it's burning and everyone's kind of confused about what went down. It's like, how are we going to rationalize that? We have Paco kind of having everyone gathered around it. It's just kind of the awkward thing of like, yeah, you kind of are responsible for burning it down. It's like, I'm not here trying to blame anyone. It's like something else was kind of going on there because some lady was like, I've never done anything violent, but it's kind of messed up what happened to her and everything. So like, hey, everyone kind of chip in some donations and we'll try to make this better. But then it turns into a thing of, we're not dealing with the real issue here, and that's Manuel, the priest. We got to get rid of him. Like, all this crazy shit's happened ever since he got here. But Paco's like, oh, we're kind of getting away from this. And then Mercedes like takes an opportunity to be, because obviously she's wanted to get him out of town, and uses this as a means to be like, hey, if we basically in her mind, it's like, you don't have to worry about bearing all the responsibility, Paco, of getting rid of him. If we can basically get the entire town to sign off on it, then it's not really just on you. But obviously Paco's dealing with the fact is that like, you don't know what's going on here. You're ready to get rid of the priest and everything. He's going to be a necessary means for dealing with all, because there's so much other shit at play here, because Paco and Elena are the only ones who know what's really going on. Interesting timing though, because Manuel's not in town. He actually left town and went to Rome. Because this episode did a really good job of also giving us a look into his past, and that it still puts me in that situation where it's like, because I was at the beginning, I'm still, I guess to a certain extent unclear, because I felt like maybe, I guess because of his BS of being like, oh yeah, trying to rationalize everything, that part of me was like, did he not really believe in all of this? But it's like, obviously he has, because as we look in his past, oh, he's definitely come across the devil and the supernatural shit, like way before, like, everything with the coin, even before that came into his life, he had already experienced all this before, because we see a younger him, because he had a very interesting perspective where he's like, let's like learn from the devil, in the sense of like talking with the devil. So the more we learn, the more because for him, he's like, I became a priest because I want to get rid of all the devil's hosts. Like, he wants to get rid of evil. And it's like, for him, the best way to do that is to learn about it. It's like, but like, obviously, he was in class, which is interesting to see. Like, it makes sense, but it's still interesting to see like a literal priest class, and it looked like, it was an exorcism and stuff like that, but he had suggested in the class like, hey, why don't we, take this as an opportunity to listen, to have a conversation, because like the best way to fight your enemy is to know thy enemy. And it's like, all we're doing is stuff from the books. It's like, obviously it's a very, this is the way things have always been, and it's like, but this isn't enough, because for him it's like, we need to be armed with more than just the Bible and these words and holy war. We need to have much more in our arsenal if we want to get, battle the devil. But it's like, who are you to think like, oh, do you think the devil's so stupid? It's like, well, we act like this is all it takes to beat him. So if this is all it takes to beat him, then the devil is stupid, isn't he? But it's like, we need to learn all that we can. And so, but you can understand from one perspective of just how that way of thinking can seem a little blasphemous. I'm assuming it's just kind of because it's going against everything. That's just kind of like, this is how things work, and you're kind of someone talking out of the box, like outside of the box. I can see how it can, rub someone the wrong way, I think. But then we had the whole Sandro and Fabio thing. Like, Fabio was like, okay, let me show you this. Like, it ended up being a guy that was chained up, which we see this guy a little earlier in the episode, present day, because obviously I'm assuming it's only 2010 in the show. I don't know if they specify what year the show takes place in. I don't know if it's 2020, because like all that stuff in Rome, it was like 1990. Well, because I might be off a little kilter, because Sandro said like the last time he saw Manuel was like 20 years ago. It's been like 20 years since we've seen each other. So, because that to me, that made it seem like it was 2010, but who knows when the last time they actually saw each other. It could have really been like, oh, it was like 2000 was the last time we saw each other. So it could be set present. It probably is. I don't think they've ever gotten specific about the date, but like, I think I would, because at one point we see them in Jerusalem in 1992. So it's like, so that kind of adds some validity to like, there's probably still like an 8-year period before they went their separate ways and everything, But circling back to it, they met that demon or guy or whoever he is, a dude in a suit that Fabio had chained up, because obviously he wanted to kind of go down the route Manuel was kind of suggesting of like kind of learning from them, speaking to him to kind of understand everything. And obviously for Sandro, it's like, first it was Manuel being like, how do we know you're really who you are? And it's like, oh, when you were 12, you accidentally killed your dog with a stone, buried it in the backyard. Your mom thought, your dad did something, kind of sent it away or sold it or whatever. And it's like, they argued about it. Also, it's like, hey, when you masturbate, you think about this very specific girl, and it's like, oh, if she only knew, like, all the cum that was scattered. I thought it was just so interesting. It's like all the semen that was on her, just because of she wouldn't know where it was coming from. The fact is that it's from you constantly thinking about her. And so it's like, I'm the real deal. I know stuff that no one else would know. But Sandro wasn't really convinced. It's like, well, you can shoot fire out your mouth and stuff like that, right? He's like, well, you want to see it? A classic, literally light Sandro on fire. Luckily, they were able to extinguish him. I did think that was kind of neat, the whole, I'm a big fan of like cutting back and forth between present day and the past, and kind of like things happening simultaneously like that. I'm a fan of that in TV shows. I mean, just in storytelling, period. But, it seems like he's kind of where that stuff about the Canaanites kind of comes from, at least to a certain extent, because he's the one that's kind of suggesting, like, the whole situation about like the whole Satan situation isn't what you think it is, because it's kind of going back to the conversation that, Satan and all his followers and everything were playing their roles, the roles that they were playing, because they wanted to play the roles in the grand design that is, God's plan, essentially. So it's like kind of going back to and now because of that, because of last week's episode, it adds a certain perspective to that whole Jesus and Judas thing at the very beginning in the intro. It adds a certain context to that now, because it always looked like Jesus was just kind of smiling, and it's like, at first I took that as like, oh, like laughing because you were betrayed by someone, but now it's like, oh, like but maybe it's like, oh, this is all going according to plan, and maybe that's why Judas kills himself, and it just adds a certain perspective now with that knowledge of what the Canaanites believe about, Judas's betrayal. Jesus was in on it. This was all part about completing God's plan. And then obviously that even leads that dude to be like, oh, there's this whole conversation about, because Fabio was saying it like that God is Satan, because God doesn't even want to acknowledge the fact is that evil is a part of him, because, he's in every one of us and everything, because everything's kind of under his plan. But, he wants to focus mainly on the good and not just the evil that is actually a part of him, because it's like, just like you are a part in every person, you're also in Satan, you're in everything that he does and everyone he's connected to. So all of that darkness, you're kind of in that, because you're kind of in everything, So it was just an interesting thing to learn that, it's like, this is where Fabio and them were learning it. It was, even Manuel was like, should we be listening to him? Like, he's a demon. Once again, they never gotten specific about like what you considered them. I'd assumed you'd consider them demons and stuff like that, because even Fabio was even asking like, how many of you are, like, is there just one devil or is there multiple devils? But it's kind of like for the dude, he was explaining like, you kind of have to like fudge things a little bit if you kind of, it's basically too much for just one person to have. Even referring to like, oh, the reason why like hell isn't what you think it is. It's like basically Satan was able to hide all those followers, all those soldiers he brought with him. He was able to hide them from God's eye by putting them in himself. So it's almost like, oh, so hell is literally inside of himself. Like he's got like, it made it seem like Satan's got a dimension inside of himself where he keeps everyone hidden, and that's actually what hell is, So I don't know. So now it puts there, and now it kind of makes sense why Fabio's kind of down the route that he is. That it's like, okay, so because he believes that this is all part of some grander plan, like evil is good, good is evil. It's all the same. It's all part of some greater plan that they're trying to enact. Because it was about, because there's a whole because even Fabio was kind of having this conversation earlier in the episode, like reaching out to God's not the easiest thing, but it's like if we can almost like capture Satan, then maybe that's going to draw God out. Essentially, maybe God will finally kind of pop up. It's kind of what he was insinuating, and I think like it's just that thing of like once he's kind of got that in his head, and like obviously that demon kind of whispering in his ears, and it's that thing of like I think you get so warped in believing like I'm strong, because he was saying like fear is what encourages him. So I think it's that thing. It kind of reminded me, and it's kind of a weird reference to make, because I always like make weird references. It kind of reminds me a little Kingdom Hearts. I have this a little fresh in my mind because I was watching someone play the first game. When obviously, when Riku's reaching out for Sora, and like Riku's getting consumed by the darkness, Sora's kind of freaking out, but Riku's calm about it. It kind of felt like that with Fabio. Like he's reaching his hand out for Manuel. It's like, come with me. But it's like, no, like, we don't, there is one thing. We still have a choice. We get to choose who we are and who we be and what we do. And Fabio crossed over the door, burning blue flames, which I guess that's supposed to be hellfire. I always think that's so interesting how that, like, some stuff has made a distinction between just, like, regular, like, flames and stuff, like red flames. And it's like, no, there's straight up hellfire, which is blue, which I just think that's a fascinating distinction. So I'm assuming that's what that was supposed to be. But when Manuel opens the door, I almost halfway expect him to touch the doorknob and his hand will burn. But it's like, when he opens the door, the room is empty and it's no fire. It's just like a regular room. Turns around, home dude's gone, so he just made sure to take care of Sandro. And it's like what they experience. And that's why, I mean, I guess in retrospect, that's why he, once again, in his own way, by people realizing the truth of what's really going on. I guess it's a thing of like, maybe even back then he was kind of denying what he saw and being like, no, it's not what I think it is. I'm just being a little crazy, because he's the only, I mean, Sandro experienced and he did too, but it's like running away from that truth. And running away is kind of a big theme of their side of the story, because when he goes to visit Sandro, it's like, yeah, that's why I'm here in this prison. Like, being surrounded by all this suffering keeps me hidden so they can't find me. He's like, that's why you need it. Like, you are in a worse situation. You're going to need a lot more pain and suffering to hide you. So go somewhere where there's a war. If you want to, like, don't stop running. Like, you've put yourself in a position where they can't find you, but go to somewhere. It's like basically pain, a place of suffering, access. You need to be in a place like, of a war where there's thick skin around the soul. So it's like, I guess you can't use the souls of those around you to kind of track him down. Like, I guess it's almost like if you're like, they act as like, I guess almost like not necessarily an EMP for like the soul or whatever. I guess that'd be kind of it's like no signals get through, because there's I guess Faraday cage, essentially, if I had to, I guess, make a comparison. I know it's like a weird comparison to make, but it's almost what sounded like that's what Sandro was saying. Like, you need to basically make yourself be in a very war place so you can be surrounded by people, and all that pain and suffering will act as a bit of a Faraday cage to keep you hidden from the rest, well, from those who are hunting you down. Obviously, this is connected to Fabio. Like, they ended up running into him in 92, but he acted like he didn't recognize who, he acted like he didn't recognize. It's like, oh man, well, I'm not who you think I am. And he gets in a car with a dude, which we see that same dude, and he looks exactly the same, even though that was 92, because obviously Manuel's older, obviously Fabio's older, but that dude kind of looked exactly the same, because we saw him with that group as they were collecting. It's like every episode we're seeing them collecting more and more coins. Once again, begs the question, what about the coin that Elena tossed last episode? Like, I'm sure there's going to be a way of getting that back, because that's going to end up somewhere. Maybe it's at the bottom of all that water. Maybe you have to go for it, or maybe it's going to wash up somewhere. It feels like it's one of those things where like the coins want to be found. So maybe there's like a radiation from them. Like, maybe there's a pull from them, because it makes you, maybe it's just scriptures that they're reading that tells them like, oh, this is where the coins are. Because that's why I just find fascinating that you're just able to know where those coins are. It's like, oh, to go here, here, here. Oh, there's a giant statue of Jesus. Roll one of his eyes and you'll find, like, it has to be like some like treasure hunting type of stuff. But it's like, slowly but surely, we know they have a good chunk of them. Granted, how many they have in the grand scheme of things, we still don't know. That older man, I'm already forgetting his name. It's like Father, it's something with an L. I'm already blanking on it. That's the teacher that kicked him out of the class back in the day. I believe that's the same dude. I could be mistaken. But Manuel turns to him because it's like, I don't know who else to trust in this situation, because he knows he can't really trust anyone else in the church, considering like they're there, so it's like, obviously I need to find someone to turn to. He actually suggested like the only person you can turn to in this situation to help you deal with all this is the Pope. So it's like, all right, I'll set up a situation where you can talk to him about it. Because it's like, well, how many people know about the 30 coins? It's like, well, Sandro knows, and now you guys are the only one who know about like the 30 coin situation, like at least within the confines of like the people I've talked to about it. And so he set up the situation. Obviously, Manuel has that dream, or maybe it was real, where he kept running into that devil guy from all those years ago. And he happened to look exactly the same. Because we saw earlier in the episode, like the Pope was meeting with everyone, and he runs into him, and the guy was like, "Oh, you're not going to kiss me?" So it's like the Pope, I guess, immediately knew what he was, could kind of tell, so he didn't. That's why part of me later on is like, when Manuel meets up with the Pope, I'm like, did he get possessed or something like that? I wasn't sure, but it seemed like he was still himself. But it's like, all right, for what's about to come, like, I want you to keep in contact. The fact is, this conversation never happened. No one's ever going to acknowledge this happened. You were never here. We never had this conversation. But it's like, I'm going to trust one person to be our in-between because we don't know who else is involved in this. And it turns out said person is the Cardinal Fabio. So it's like, okay. And because obviously Manuel ran into Fabio last episode, so he knows he's neck deep, because that's what him and Sandro were talking about. It's like, yeah, he's neck deep in all of this. There is no hiding from him, considering like obviously the whole mirror situation. So, which I guess kind of answers the whole like soul situation that Sandra was kind of referring to about like kind of like using suffering to, I guess like those mirrors can't see through suffering, which isn't, maybe I guess because that one mirror was probably, maybe that's the only mirror that looks through fear. Maybe that's not necessarily the same thing as looking, well, maybe all the mirrors can look, throw your biggest fear back at you because it's staring into your soul, which kind of makes sense. So, but if you surround yourself with enough suffering, like I guess it block, like I said, everyone else acts like a faraday cage, I guess, and kind of blocks out the signal, so they can't really see, because the mirrors will only be able to see the suffering of all those around you. It's kind of like basically a sensory overload for the mirrors, so they can't really pinpoint exactly who you're looking for if you're surrounded by so much pain and suffering. That's my understanding of it. Maybe I'm completely misunderstanding it, but now it shows Manuel like he can't even trust the Pope. I mean, yes, he can trust the Pope, but it's like, oh, I'm supposed to be talking through your right-hand man, and your right-hand man is neck deep in all of this. So it's like, yeah, you might be, it's like probably makes him think like, well, can I really even trust the Pope? Considering like his right-hand man is, a part of all this, one of the people that I'm running from that's kind of collecting these 30 coins and everything. So, I guess even Manuel doesn't know all that Fabio's been up to this entire time. Maybe they're still, granted, that's a lot of time we're still unaware of, when it comes to his story. So it'll be interesting to kind of find out where things kind of go from there, because I guess it's going to be a thing of like, I kind of have to do this on my own, because I'm sure he can't really bring it to the Pope's attention. Like, oh, it's like, no, this is a cardinal. You're wrong about that. Like, this is the person I trust most. I mean, considering that he's going to listen to Fabio more than he is going to listen to, someone like Manuel, the 2 years in prison, I'm sure that's just going to add a little bit of a stain to his reputation. But there's that side of things. Then there's the other side of things where it's like, hey, the whole situation with Elena, other people around town trying to slyly, like, oh, that dude was like, oh, here's some extra money. She's like, no, like, you're covered for the money. It's like, no, go ahead and take it. It's like, okay. Then she's at the store, and it's like, oh, no, you're good. It's like, you don't have to pay. And it's like, why? And then, like, 3 ladies nearby are whispering and talking about it, and you're like, okay. It's almost like this charity, because that's the effed up thing about it. It's almost like, well, we don't know what happened, but we're not responsible for Elena. It's like, you were literally there putting out the fires you started. It's like, no, like, we were there putting the fires out in general. Like, we weren't there being bad, And for Elena, it's like she gets targeted because they're like, oh, look at you making yourself the victim. It's like, you SOBs literally went in and burned down her clinic. It's like, you don't want to take responsibility for being like, no, it couldn't have been us. We're because they're trying to justify it. But I'm like, oh no, we're trying to do right by you. But here you are playing the victim. Oh, how dare you? Because, and the way Elena talks about it later with Paco, it's like, everyone, like, you're telling me like to forgive them, that everything's going to be okay. It's like, my husband disappeared 2 years ago and they're still talking about it, because it's almost like they blame me for that, and it's in their own twisted way. It's almost like they're trying to justify by being like, well, she kind of deserved it. They're trying to make it seem like she's not a good person, because once again, there's the rumors about why her husband left. Like, did he leave because he cheated on her, or did he leave because she cheated on him? Like, there's all that. Like, everyone's trying to blame her in some regard, and it's like, she was the wrong one that got wronged by you guys. But also for Elena, it's frustrating because it's like these people, they have some idea of like the weird shit going on, but even then it's like they don't know anything about it. Like the only two people in this town that know the full truth is Elena and Paco, because they're the only ones that have seen the truth of everything that's really going on. And it's like that's frustrating because it's like people are looking at her with pity, like, oh, poor her. And she's like, I'm the one that should be looking at you like, you idiots. Don't you see? Can't you see what's really going on around you? I can see it, but you can't. You're blissfully unaware. Like, yeah, you have some vague notion of an idea, but even then, they're kind of in denial in their own right. She's like, I'm the only one. We're the only ones that see it. And for Paco, it's like, because Elena's like, she's like, oh, like leaving Revoke, and it's like, for Paco, obviously, it's a complicated thing. She's married. Granted, her husband's not around, but her and Roque have their whole day, but obviously for him, he's married, but it's still a thing that he cares for her, that there is already something there, which I'm sure that leads to a whole complicated thing of like why his wife was, easily driven to do all that, that jealousy, was already there, and it just like mirror Manuel just like stoked the flames of that fire that was already there. So it complicates things, but it also, for a thing for Paco, is like, I can't talk to anyone about it. Even his wife doesn't know, even though they experienced what they experienced, she was kind of knocked out at the time, and so that's a whole thing. But he's the only one that's 100% aware about what's going on, that it's no longer dream. It's like, because it happened to both of us. We both, so if you leave, like, who can I confide in? So that leaves him a little frustrated. So there's like the back and forth between him and Merche, because it's like, she's like, you're acting like you're going through something. I'm the one that has to handle everything, running the business, going through all the talks, because you're all doing your thing. I'm the one that kind of gets left handling the bag. Like, the fact is that if I don't handle things, and if I'm not careful about the situation, because for him it's like, you wanted Elena gone, so now you've kind of got what you want. And she was like, no, it's not like that, because for her it's like, it is a thing of like, the more you hang around Elena, it kind of like, her bad reputation is going to spread to you, because also his wife kind of, I'm sure there's some level of her that, worries or suspects that might be something there between them, but it's also like her natural reputation around town is going to spread to you. You're going to be shocked if you don't get reelected, and you're going to wonder why. She's like, I handle all that stuff, and it's just a frustrating thing of like, he doesn't really, like I said, he's, especially with Elena leaving, it's like, I only have, myself to really talk to, so he doesn't have anyone to confide into about all this. Then as she was leaving, she runs into Antonio. It's like he's out at the hospital, and it's like, well, I'm going to take you back, and or I'm going to report the fact is that you stole that alcohol from the church. He's like, yeah, but there's that lady who steals stuff. She's got a devil inside her. I'm like, okay. And then he sets up something where he was like, her husband's alive. It's like, oh yeah, I know her husband's alive because of the whispers told me. It's like, basically, if you can get her, because she's still married, so if you can get her reunited with her husband again, it's almost like your house will come back in order, because Paco won't be around her anymore, because it's like she's reunited with her husband and everything, and he doesn't want to be a homewrecker. So it's like, it's almost like your house, everything will kind of go back to the way you want it to be, because it's like, you're someone that constantly tried to mind your own business. You try not to, it's almost like he's implying like, we need your help with this whole thing, because it's like, you don't try to dive into other people's business. You try to live your life, try to keep your head down. So it's kind of like, you want your life to be what you want it to be. And, that was also a whole thing that Paco was throwing in her face, that if you don't get your way, you kind of always end up finding another way for things to kind of work out in your favor, But it kind of circled back to that whole thing of like, okay, so why are you helping out in that regard, Antonio? Like, I didn't know what he meant when he was like, oh, her husband's alive. I don't know whether he's setting up that other thing they were doing where it's like, the lady, which I'm assuming that's the lady he was referring to, who steals stuff, because she had like a wallet that had like a picture of her, of Elena and her husband, and it's like she poured like some alcohol, whatever was in that bottle, and then that scarecrow, I was like, are you about to make that scarecrow into her husband? I was like, I guess not. And lo and behold, it turns out you are. So I was like, okay, so I guess they're trying to lead Elena back in down, because I guess they need her to help them. I guess this is their way to keep her in line, or so they could get the goal. Like, it's like all these small little things. What the purpose is, I don't know. Like, maybe this kind of goes in line with the whole Manuel thing. Like, maybe they're pulling these strings little by little because it's part of some grander plan. I don't know. Like, what benefit you'll have. I guess you have someone that kind of will keep an eye on her. It'll make it a lot easier to have an eye on her if you have her husband around, like kind of make her, maybe she'll let her guard down. I don't know. Maybe this is the easiest way to kind of get rid of her. I don't know. Because they're also trying to, it seems like they're making their point to kind of split up Paco and Elena to a certain, I mean, granted, she was already leaving town, but I guess this way they keep her in town because I guess this town's going to be like the epicenter for what's to come. Like I said, maybe it's about trying to, because the last place they saw the coin was with her. They don't know that she threw it away. So like I said, maybe this is their way to get someone close to her to get the coin, which is interesting considering they dealt with the whole fake Manuel last episode. And I'm assuming, I just don't know what to make of it. And that's why I'm like, because Antonio's like, oh, her husband's alive. Like, so that's why I almost made it thought he was suggesting, like, use your power and resources to find her husband. But now it's like, oh, her husband's, I don't know. Maybe this situation is supposed to be like, oh, I helped find him or whatever. And she's supposed to kind of be the hero of it. Like, maybe that's what they're setting up. I don't know. But you had Paco show up at the airport to tell her, like, hey, your husband's back. So she was about to leave, but now she's drawn back in. So, and also because this has to tie into, everything with Manuel, because even he was like, why doesn't Pavio just kill me? It's like, if he wanted you dead, he would have killed you before now. But it's like, he's keeping you alive for a reason because it's part of this plan. Like, he has greater plans planned for you and everyone else. I don't know. I don't know what to 100% make of it, but I'm really interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.